Hello, this is Stephen Eckert Musgrave, and what we're going to discuss today is philosophical atheism versus militant irrational atheism. Now, the difference I'm going to explain is quite simple. A person who comes about becoming an atheist because they find the theistic point of view does not follow their reason, and certain things may appear illogical to them, and they go about their business. If someone asks them what their point of view is, they tell them. But they don't make a lot of assumptions about the intelligence or character of people who are religious. That's what I would define as a philosophical atheist. That would be me, for one. An irrational atheist is someone who has come to the same conclusions, but is burdened by an excess of emotion and by irrational views about religion and the history of religion and what drives a person to be religious. People like, well, many of the people who you see on the internet, on these YouTube videos. They claim that anyone who has a religious point of view is basically entirely irrational. They despise people who are Christians or Muslims, or to a lesser extent Buddhists, for their so-called irrationality. Yet they know nothing of the psychological issues that affect a person's point of view religiously. And there have been many very interesting studies done by sociologists of religions, by psychologists of religion, which illuminate many of the aspects of belief. For instance, apostasy, why a person goes away from the faith of their parents, and why even a person can be, and this is an apostate from atheism. It's not exactly the perfect word to describe it, but can have atheist parents and become religious due to the relationship between their parents and themselves. And I'll go into this a little later with some quotes. One of the common things that the militant atheist likes to do is to say that religion is a major cause of war, and therefore if we didn't have religion, we wouldn't have war, or very little of it. Now, this just doesn't hold up to historical scrutiny at all. Yes, there have been wars that have been fought for religion, but for the most part, wars are fought over economic resources and ethnic issues, which may or may not have a religion attached to it. The BBC did a study of the cause of war over time, and that study came out a few years ago. It was called the BBC War Audit, and it came to the conclusion that religion does not have a significant role in wars historically. Of course, there were constant and myriads of a constant stream of wars in prehistory that we know of. And they were all over the same thing, power and money and land. There weren't any, as far as we can tell, They had little or nothing to do with religion. They didn't need religion. The other guy had the land and you wanted it. And any archaeological evidence is pretty straightforward that these things went in patterns according to population density and this sort of thing. So why do people continue to pursue this? It's just simply stated, you don't believe in religion. You don't think it's logical. It's quite reasonable to say that. And yes, there are plenty of militant Christians and more than militant Muslims that will not embrace your point of view gracefully. And it's important not to let fanatics of any sort, whether it be a Marxist, socialist fanatic, a Leninist, such as Stalin and Mao Zedong or Pol Pot, or whether it's some mullah somewhere issuing fatwas. These people can't come to power. If they do, absolute power corrupts absolutely, and that absolute corruption has nothing whatsoever to do with one's metaphysical viewpoint. It has to do with the nature of power, the nature of the human mind, and those weaknesses which we have as human beings when we're exposed to it. For instance, there have been a great deal of arguments between Christians and atheists over Adolf Hitler. Whether Adolf Hitler was a Christian, as some claim, or was he an atheist? This is a favorite tact of Richard Dawkins. And, of course, the evangelical right claims that Hitler was an atheist. He wasn't either one, actually. While he claimed to be a Christian at times politically, in private, he stated quite simply that he thought Christianity was a rebellion against nature, because the strong must devour the weak, or else the microbes will take over eventually. And that was quite clear in a book called Hitler's Table Talks, which was recordings of Hitler's little dinner speeches when he was alone with his cronies, and it was recorded by the infamous Nazi Martin Bormann. So those are completely bogus ideas. That a person's metaphysical worldview, when they're in power, will determine their actions. What determines action is their character and the amount of power they have, and if there are people around them of goodwill, honorable men and honorable women who will call upon them to restrain themselves, and in some cases even martyr themselves for the cause of freedom. Excuse the word martyr, militant atheists. Now, I've gone into this in great detail. In fact, I put together a book entitled The New Atheism as a Cult of Intellect. And I go into much of the dynamic of that. It's just a little ebook. Those of you who want to read it, I will give you an email address, and you don't have to buy it. I will just send you a copy of the PDF. But anyway, that's the first installment. We want to separate the two positions. There are many things that are said by the new atheists and the what I call irrational atheists that simply don't stand up, as I said before, to historical scrutiny. concerning the role of religion in wars. Yes, it has been involved in wars, a good deal of them, but when you look closely, you will always see the hand of the power behind it is using religion for its own benefits. It's always a struggle of king against king. It's never a struggle of Protestant against Catholic or Muslim against Christian. It's always Saladin versus Emperor Louis, or the Caliphate versus Charles Martel, whatever it is. It always comes down to that. So that's what we're going to discuss, and in the next one we'll go into more detail about the role of scientism. That is, the view that science in and of itself is the only means by which we can accurately determine what's real. And there are all kinds of problems with that. And when it's taken to a certain extent, it becomes as irrational as any metaphysical view of religion. Because ultimately, scientism is based on scientific materialism or physicalism. And that is, at ground, a metaphysical view. Matter and even energy could not be defined, much less something like consciousness. And in a recent humanist cartoon narrated by Stephen Fry, What Children Should Know About Death, one of the statements made was, there is no evidence for consciousness after death. Well, first of all, you have to say, according to who? That's the first question. But scientism's dogma is to invoke the word science as if it is an actual body of knowledge that on which all the true adherents agree, which of course is absolutely absurd. But the other thing is, we can't describe consciousness itself. We can't view consciousness itself. You can't view someone's consciousness. You can view their actions. And if you define consciousness by within certain parameters, the movement of cells, etc., well, yes, you're going to come up with the conclusion that there's no evidence for that. But ultimately, those philosophers like Daniel Dennett, who go to the logical extreme of that kind of thinking, say that there is no such thing as consciousness, period. Period. So if there's no such thing as consciousness, there's no such thing of consciousness when you're alive. So it's absolutely trivial to mention what consciousness happens after death. And that's the problem with the sophistry involved in a lot of this. So that's enough for right now, and we'll get into it a little more later.